Good afternoon, everyone. Happy International Women's Day. I'm Susanne Johnson from the EMA. I'm the Member Experience and Production Manager, and I welcome everyone to our webinar today. We would like to do so, first of all, some quick housekeeping. So this webinar is run on Zoom, and it is like a webinar only format today, so we won't be able to hear or see you guys, everyone that has joined us today, but we will run a Q&A at the end, and you'll have a chance to put your questions down below into that Q&A chat, and we will raise those after our speakers have completed their talks. The reason why we are calling in for this webinar today is that we found that there's a need to talk about the last 2 years. The last 2 years were really hard on everyone, and also to women in business. And we find there's some very valuable stories that our speakers have to share from the last 2 years. And we would really like to hear from them and how they managed to get through those 2 years and what their experience was, and really trying to understand what was the light at the end of the tunnel for them. So we hope that Auckland businesses and Auckland women in particular can profit from those inspirational stories, because really at the end, we all can learn from each other, and we have probably gone through similar journeys, and we can really profit from the tips that we can provide today to each other. So I'm also noting that today's webinar will be recorded, and we will go out with a webinar recording to you guys after the webinar. So now I would like to just give a brief summary of who will be joining us today, some of the lovely ladies that are joining us today. And I've asked the studio to just highlight on each of one of you, whilst I give a brief summary about them. And we're starting with Sarah Trotman from the Business Mentors. So I'm very happy that Sarah is here with us today. Sarah is the CEO of the New Zealand Business Mentors. Maybe quickly about the Business Mentors. They are an independent non-for-profit organization. Sorry, I have to read this all off the script. I haven't practiced it so well that I can just be free in speaking. I would like to just read it out at this point. A non-for-profit organization dedicated to the delivery of a business mentoring service. The national service maintains a regional focus made possible by 17 agencies whose coordinators match local mentors with local business people, mentees also called. So really interesting. And I also have prepared a bit of a blurb for Sarah and what she is like. So Sarah is not only a director, she's also a celebrant and a fierce advocate for women. She's not one step back from challenging people at the most senior levels of power, if not authentically living their commitment to gender bias. Whether it be the owner of the National Business Review, the Vice Chancellor of the AUT, or the State Services Commissioner, she will not hesitate to shine a spotlight on big issues holding women back. Today, Sarah will speak on who has inspired her to pursue a life without limitations. She'll share a few examples of calling out gender bias, and I hope it encourages you and to do the same. So after Sarah, we will hear from Dellwyn Stuart. And now a few things about Dellwyn. Dellwyn is the CEO of YWCA Auckland. And the organization is leading New Zealand's oldest women's organization, giving all girls and women the opportunity to thrive and to be free of gender-biased discrimination. And today we will hear from Dellwyn about some of the effects of the restrictions of COVID. We will hear that the YWCA's hostel, it's her social enterprise, drifted into deficit in 2020, effectively turning off access to revenue. What followed was 2 years of managing in uncertainty and rethinking their investment strategy while continuing to serve young women through the pandemic. Very interesting, Dellwyn. Looking forward to hearing from you. And then we will also hear from Kenina Court. Kenina is the Chief Pathfinder at Pathfinder Solutions LP. Now, who are Pathfinder Solutions? They're bringing a fresh and forward-thinking approach to accounting, advisory, and coaching. Their focus is on adding value to their clients through simplifying the complex, giving practical and actionable advice and strategy so that you can plan and achieve your financial goals and protect your assets while focusing on growing your business and net worth. That reflects exactly what I've learned from Kenina. She can really simplify things and work effectively. So for the last 2 years now, what we'll hear from Kenina is it has really highlighted for her the fact that she has to manage various aspects. She has to manage her family, and those can be like the family at work, but also the family at home. And not only has she got one job, Pathfinder, she also has a childcare center and various age groups to manage there. And Kenina's mission was always that she had to wrap her arms around all of those groups of people while the pandemic outbreak started. So maybe before I move to the speakers now, I would also like to just highlight a bit my own experience of the pandemic, because mine was rather home-centered anyway. I was quite lucky in a sense that when we had the announcement happening on the 25th of March 2020 that New Zealand at 12 p.m. is moving into alert level 4, which led to the whole nation going into self-isolation, and a state of emergency was declared at that day. I was actually at home, fully pregnant, ready to give birth. And I had to make the decision, do I go into the hospital or do I dare to give, do I really dare to be at home to give birth to my second son? So, and I would really like to highlight that it was actually a really, really beautiful experience that I had, and the decision that I made to stay at home with my family. I have another son who we could not just pass on to someone else because everyone was in isolation. It was very, very strict times back in those days. And I had an excellent midwife. The midwife was so strong and so convinced that I could do that. She said, forget about COVID in here in the house. I forget that I have maybe been dealing with people who have COVID, with mothers that have just given birth. Now it's important that you give birth here at home. You can do it. And if anything happens, we can still go to the hospital and you can give birth there. And it was really one of the most beautiful experiences in my life. I feel like I was very lucky the way we timed it. I mean, it wasn't planned at all, of course, but I felt very lucky that I wasn't out there actually having to deal with all of these work-related issues about setting your work up at home and having all of these all of this workload and all of these commitments to clients whilst going through all of those changes and being isolated at home. So I felt very fortunate and lucky that I could be at home at that time with my family and fully focusing on the newborn baby. Yeah, so that was my story, short and brief. And I would like to move on to Sarah, who has a very special story with us to share today. If I may hand over to you now, Sarah, please.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you to EMA for hosting this incredibly important webinar. And I have to say, it's a great privilege to be on this webinar with two very dear friends, business friends, Kenina Court of Pathfinder and Dellwyn Stuart, Chief Executive of YWCA. So thank you both for joining us today. I think when COVID hit, the issue for business mentors, and we've got 2,000 business mentors spread right across the country, and of course they're not just in Auckland. So when Auckland's experiencing a challenge with COVID, it's not necessarily replicated in other areas across the country. So it was a constant juggling of what information we need to be giving to mentors, what obligations we have to those mentors under the Health and Safety at Work Act. And then, of course, I have my wonderful staff who I have to say let's say we've locked down for a year in total, never once has there been a complaint. They've been positive, they've been productive, they've found ways around working around challenges. One of the lovely things that we did as a team is about every 10 days or so, I would ask them to put into the hat a few ideas of what they would like to be gifted over that 10-day period. And we had gifts going out to our staff, which I have to say was money very well spent because it kept us all very buoyant and positive. And those gifts, excuse me, those gifts were things like $100 towards your next business outfit, or $100 for a gift basket towards the person who has been your biggest supporter through lockdown. So we had lots of fun with that sort of thing. But in terms of lockdown for me, I don't have young children. Thankfully, they were off my hands. I had a wee bit of a panic where I thought my son really should be back with me. And he said, no, I've just moved to Dunedin. I've chosen to live with my flatmates, and that's exactly where I'm staying. And that was the right decision for him. So I'm glad he stayed down there. But I do have elderly parents. And when I say elderly, they're very capable, but they were in isolation, of course. And therefore, Mum's 13 different projects, whether it's Bridge or Recipe Club or Book Club, the 13 different projects had been canned. So I was sort of juggling my working day and also getting, I think, probably every person over the age of 80 that wanted to learn how to get onto Zoom on the North Shore and all these different vetting activities, trying to get them to, get set up. So it was bedlam for the first 2 weeks. And then I realized that mindset is everything, that I needed to focus on the most important things, which is getting myself ready for the day. So exercise, eating well, just being very present to any of the challenges and just rolling with the challenges, taking one day as it comes. Now, it's International Women's Day. It was very disappointing to read this morning that 23% of women say if they have a partner in the household, that their work setup is superior to their partners. Only 23%. That is shocking. When you add over that also, and I don't have the statistic, I'm sorry, but also those women are doing the lion's share of the homeschooling and the care of elderly parents. Now, one wonders why they put up with that, I have to say, because, very early on in my marriage, I put my foot down and I said, look, this will be a 50-50 thing. Now, I know not everyone has that privilege to be able to do that, but women need to start claiming and owning the things that are important to them. And, I suspect that if only 23% are happy with their workstation working from home, there's a huge amount of challenge going on in that household. What I wanted to share was, and I've sort of touched on it, I guess, around how privileged I am. My parents would be the people that have had the biggest impact on me in terms of my ability to operate with no gender challenges. In fact, it wasn't until I picked up a whole pile of National Business Review issues only about 5 years ago from my office floor. I was about to throw them all away, and I started going through them, and I realized that 96% of their stories and pictures were of older white guys. It was absolutely shocking. And I advertised in National Business Review. So I rang up National Business Review, not editorial. I spoke to the salesperson. And I said, look, this just simply isn't good enough. I'm wanting to reach all business leaders, not just male business leaders. And oh my gosh, that caused 6 months of hell. They illegally recorded that conversation. And as it happened, it proved very, very helpful that they did. because they were using, they said that I had incited anger in bringing this to their attention, and that I was blackmailing them, suggesting that I might not want to advertise with an organisation that doesn't reach women leaders or female leaders as well. They used 10 really nasty words about me, and I was so pleased that they illegally recorded the conversation, because my privacy lawyer, Catherine Gibson, took them on free of charge and put them exactly where they needed to be. So that's a small example of the sorts of things that are going on between women like me, Kenina, Dellwyn, probably many on this webinar as well. What we need to do is step up and support. That's probably my 5 minutes up. I'm really happy to take any questions as we go about our conversation today, and I've got no shortage of examples of stories like the National Business Review. In fact, I've got one with the State Services Commission, but we can park that and hear from Dellwyn. Is it Dellwyn next, Susanne? And then we'll
thank you.
Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing that. And we can probably cover some of the questions at the end. But yeah, let's move on to Dellwyn, who will share her story of the last 2 years. Thank you, Sarah. Hi, Dellwyn.
Kia ora, everyone. Yes, great to be here to share my story as well. I am the CEO of the Auckland YWCA. The YWCA has been operating in New Zealand for about 140 years. So it's a very old institution, and it's a charity that has a substantial asset. That asset was a hostel that we own on Vincent Street in Auckland City. So we are a fortunate charity in that we have our own social enterprise that generates a profit for us and allows us to act independent of grants and other income. So when COVID hit, we suddenly were plummeted into this very uncertain world, but it did bring some certainties for us in that our borders were closed. Our hostel is normally filled with international students, and they all started to return to their home. So our revenue levels were dropping sharply, and we also got to the point where we had to manage a bubble of 180 students from a variety of different countries around the world, and shared bathrooms and shared kitchens. So managing a bubble of that size and keeping everybody safe while respecting their independence and their freedom was a huge undertaking for us. Was very blessed to have an absolutely phenomenal leader in the hostel who just stepped up and just did some fantastic, wonderful things to create a sense of community over that time. And that was wonderful for me because it meant I didn't need to be sucked into being distracted by that. And I could step back and think about what we were going to do when our major investment and revenue generating machine was on a steady trip down to a deficit. Now we owned this particular hostel for about 20 years, and we'd had a number of conversations over the last 4 or 5 years about whether we should continue to own it, whether we should be operating a hostel, whether that was the right thing for us to be doing. And we'd never quite, together with the board, managed to make a clear decision on that. Call it a bit of a blind spot. Well, COVID blessed us with the opportunity to stop prevaricating to really look carefully about how we were investing our capital, how we were generating our income, and what we needed to do in the short term. And when you're a long-term organisation with a long-term investment in an asset, it's quite difficult to respond to those immediate uncertainties and make decisions in that environment. I certainly didn't want to be the CEO of the Y who lost that core asset for us. So we had to go through a full investment strategy workshop, address some quite challenging issues, and we did make a decision that we would sell the hostel. And then as the dance we've all done through the last 2 years, we're just about to go to market when we had the lockdown at the end of last year. We did eventually manage to get it on the market and sell it right at the close of the year. So in some ways, COVID has been a gift and an opportunity, because it has helped us to step up and confront some of those issues and make those decisions. A couple of other things that I think were serendipitous through COVID was a decision. We were partway into launching a brand new program when COVID hit. We decided to progress with the launching that. It's a program to recognise 25 fabulous young women in New Zealand each year. And we just very luckily hit those sweet spots over the 2 years when we weren't all in lockdown. We did have relative freedom, and we were able to launch this program and work with these young women. And it really became a fabulous a highlight, really, for us to be engaging with all these wahine toa and learning their stories and helping them connect. One of my other observations during this time was, our staff are all women, was looking at, as Sarah was describing a bit before, about what was happening in homes where there were young children and elderly parents and different tensions that people had to consider. And I very early on said to the team, we're not going to talk about productivity. Productivity is not going to be what it normally is. I don't want you all working around the clock to squeeze in a half an hour here and a half an hour there to try and make up a 40-hour week. I'm okay with just doing what we can do reasonably. We want to come out of the end of this healthy. And that immediately, I could see the tension sink on people's shoulders. I'm just going, oh, it's wonderful to have that permission to actually manage our lives. And I think that was a really wise approach to have taken during COVID. The other thing that the Y always does is, we're the champions of young women, and looking out at the effect COVID had on a lot of young women we work with. They might have been senior high school students or university students. A lot of those girls gave up their university or gave up their study in order to either take care of kids at home or to get some part-time work to bring in incomes at home. COVID's been very hard on low-income people. And now as we're coming out of COVID, we've got really high inflation. The cost of living is only going in one direction at the moment. And that was why we also made the decision to launch a campaign around closing our gender pay gap and particularly our ethnic and gender pay gaps as well. And we launched that during COVID. So I think sometimes things that can seem challenging and barriers on the outset, there's always a silver lining. There's always an opportunity to be grasped in that campaign. Today we've launched New Zealand's first pay gap registry. It's just going from strength to strength, and I'm feeling really positive that we might actually get a result this year that will change the landscape on pay gaps. So that was what I wanted to share today, that it's challenging, but it's gifted us some decision making and some new areas of focus. Yeah, and really happy to take questions at the end.
Great, thank you so much, Dellwyn, very insightful. And I'm very interested in those campaigns you have started. Sarah has put up her hand 5 minutes ago. Was that okay? I'll ignore, okay. And then we are moving on to Kenina Court from Pathfinder Solutions about her multiple hats that she has been wearing and how she juggled during the lockdown. Yeah, we move over to Kenina now.
Thanks, Susanne. Thanks for having me. It's really good to be here. When I think back to that very first lockdown, in some ways it felt a bit like an out-of-world experience, because on one hand you had this incredible amount of uncertainty about what was happening, and on the other hand it felt like the whole world had stopped and we were now all on holiday, and we all got to have a bit of a break. It was, it was really surreal. And and when I also think back, I also think of, I never worked harder in that time as we tried to, support all of our clients, with their businesses, trying to work out what they did to look after their businesses and their people and try and figure out what they needed to do. And the thing, I guess, that stands out for me when I think back over that time is the sense that I had is that I had to try and wrap my arms around all of these people to try and make sure that there was going to be nobody left out in the cold, that everybody was going to feel supported and that they had been touched in some way so that they knew that they weren't alone. So when we went into lockdown, it was a fairly easy process for us because we were already a cloud-based business, and literally everybody went home that night of the announcement, and we started up working at home, and it was almost as if nothing had happened from a kind of a logistical point of view. So that was pretty good. School was a bit of a disaster, to be honest. Obviously none of the schools were prepared, and the school where my son was going, if he had 2 Zooms a day, that was pretty amazing. And so that meant that if he was going to be left up to his own devices, he would have quite happily gamed all day, and that wasn't going to be good. So it's like, right, got to put him into a timetable. So just like school, we split up his day into a timetable, and we put his piano practice in, we put maths time, we put in reading time, we put in his art, all of this, so that he didn't end up spending his whole day in front of the computer. So he actually enjoyed lockdown because he had quite a bit of variety. It was just a bit annoying when he got to the end of lockdown and school said to him, "Oh, well, you've come through lockdown pretty good, Nick." And yeah, he did. Not through any effort from school. So that was a thing. It was about, I guess, putting some real structure into how he did, and because he was in a good structure, that meant that my husband and I, when we were working from home, that we were able to have some structure. So we'd been home probably working for, I don't know, it might have been a couple of weeks when I started feeling like I was really disconnected. I mean, we could pick up on Teams and we could ring everybody, and that was easy, but it was just whenever you needed somebody, there was no kind of regular catch up. So we introduced this thing that we call the daily huddle. And our huddle was, at first, it was just a regular catch up at 1:30 every day, where everybody just kind of jumped online at the same time. And then we sort of introduced some structure into it. We treated it like a face-to-face meeting. So you had to turn up, you had to have your video on. I didn't care if you had your jammies on, but you had to have your video on. And we talked about the 3 top things that you had on your list of things to do that you had to get done between now and the next huddle. We talked about any challenges or roadblocks or things that you needed help or assistance with. We talked about any company-wide notices that we wanted to make sure everybody was across. So that meant that we were talking about, did everybody know about the latest wage subsidy notice? And, had anybody heard about, that IRD had announced this? That sort of thing. And then we got to the last part of the huddle, which was the best part, which we called the funnies. And that was, as people were trawling through their social media, what were the things that they had come across that kind of really took their fancy, had made them almost literally, burst out laughing, and to bring those into the daily huddle. Obviously, it all had to be PG, and to share that with the team. So you didn't have to bring something every day, but it got us sharing and seeing what other people's sense of humor was. And honestly, there's been days when you've had a bit of a tough day and you get to the huddle, and you know how it is in a family, right? You know, somebody's had a good day, somebody's had a bad day, and you know, you kind of all even each other out because of the different days that you're having. And that's what the funnies do, you know. Somebody's had a bit of a tough day and you get to the funnies, and you kind of helps you to get back into perspective. So that was great. And so we started doing that in our childcare centre. So we introduced mat times, and we created messenger groups for by each room, so that our parents and our teachers and our kids could all communicate within the rooms that they were in at the centre. And our teachers, they created activities to help the parents entertain their children, because obviously, you know, they could do it 2 days a week, but, you know, entertaining your kids for 7 days a week when you weren't used to it, you know, that was a real challenge. One of our teachers, every morning, she would video herself singing to her whole class the song that she would sing in mat time, where she would run through every single child's name in the song that she would sing. And the kids absolutely loved it. It meant that we got to check in with our whole whānau across the board, and everybody knew that there was somebody that they could reach out to. It was kind of like our little telephone tree, but via messenger. And everybody knew that they were alone, that they weren't alone, and that they were part of something that was bigger than just their household. And that was important to us, that everybody knew that. Would we do some things differently? Absolutely. I did chain myself to the desk at various times during lockdown. I put on weight because I just wasn't moving. And, you know, I thought that was okay, because it was more important that I was helping clients and supporting my team. But, you know, I think is what Sarah was referring to. You know, I needed to realize for myself that it was just as important for me to actually realize that I needed to take care of myself to get out there and move. So I had to start taking moves to kind of get me back on track, you know, which I did do. And I'm not there yet, but it's still a work in progress. With our more junior accounting team members, you know, I don't think they have come along at the same speed from a learning point of view that they would have if they were in the office, if we'd had no lockdowns. So, you know, I would introduce a lot more regular check-ins so that they would feel that they weren't interrupting somebody's day, you know, if they needed help, and that they would feel that they weren't so isolated in their learning as they tried to figure it out. I mean, more experienced team members, you know, they can jump in there and they kind of have the knowledge and the wherewithal to kind of figure some stuff out. But less experienced team members, they don't have that. So it takes them longer, and that's fine that it takes them longer. But in an office environment, face to face, they'd just lean over and they'd go, hey, how do I do this? And in a digital environment, there isn't any of that camaraderie, you know. I know some businesses, they said to everybody, you have to leave your Zoom on the whole time, or Teams on the whole time, and that kind of felt a bit invasive, you know. But you know, there's got to be, I think, a happy balance between, you know, I have to be able to see you 8 hours a day so that I can make sure that you're working, and, you know, not seeing you at all for a whole, you know, 8-hour day. You know, somewhere in between that, there has to be, you know, some sort of a happy medium. And, you know, we're almost 2 years since we first went into lockdown, and we're still doing our daily huddle, right? Every day, whether we are in the office or we are in lockdown or not, every day we still get together, still at 1:30, still to same old structure. And that has been instrumental in terms of helping us gel as a team, to build a culture. Everybody in our business knows that they are valued, that they are important, that if they've got a problem, that doesn't matter that we're not in the office together, we'll all figure it out, that nobody is going to be left alone, sort of that, what do they say in the US Army show, military things, no man left behind. Everybody knows that nobody will get left behind to figure it out on their own. And that daily huddle, the impact that it has had on our business has been extraordinary. And there's just no way I would be without that. I can't imagine what our business would be like if we didn't have that. It's been incredible. So happy to take any questions.
That's great. That's interesting. May I just ask, for how long do you usually meet up for the daily huddle? Is that like a half an hour thing?
Just half an hour. Yep, just half an hour. So, and if your team was too big that you couldn't kind of get around in half an hour, then obviously you'd kind of break your team into smaller groups, and you would do it. And that's why we only do your top 3 things, right? Because everybody's got a list as long as their arm. And in our huddle, you're only allowed, when you get to the funnies, you can't do any more than 3, right? Because again, right, people would run away and it would get out of control. So
right, sounds really good.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to open up for a Q&A. If any of our lovely audience has any questions, please join the conversation via the Q&A chat on the bottom of the Zoom window. Whilst we get questions in, I have another question, also for Kenina, because you have mentioned our young people. Is there any tips you have for our young ladies out there? Because you have mentioned they are the ones, the young people are the ones who suffer probably the most from from these lockdowns. And I guess going forward, do you have any tips for them on how to get that fulfillment in your job, and how to progress in your career most effectively? What can you do to just make sure that you're happy and that you really develop and move on?
It's a great question. I think the first thing is to not be afraid to ask for help, right? Because often when you're at when you kind of think, right, well, I'm right at the I'm the least junior member of the team, and therefore me asking questions, I'm always interrupting somebody who my boss, or somebody whose job seems more important than mine. The reality is that most people are really, really happy to help. And the thing is that often what we do is that we make assumptions about whether or not people are happy to help us on their behalf without even asking people. So we'll say, I'd like to ask Susanne to help, but she's probably too busy. Right. But
that's what I also always think. I'm like, oh, this person seems very busy. She's in all of the meetings all the time. So I'd rather not bother her with an email or reaching out, because probably she doesn't have time, or the person doesn't have time anyway. So I can imagine that a lot of other women think that way.
Yes, but maybe Susanne is busy, but is Susanne too busy to help? Well, nobody asked Susanne to to find out whether or not she was too busy to help. So I think often our inherent I guess concern for others as women is actually one of our biggest downsides, because we're too concerned about what where somebody else is at, that we don't actually ask for whatever it is that we need. And the thing is to kind of, in some ways, get over ourselves, ask for what we need. And if somebody says, no, I'm sorry, we can't help, then that's fine. Don't be offended by that. Just means that we've got to go and find somebody else who might, be in a position to help us. But don't assume.
Sarah.
I have noticed that a lot of these younger employees are observing the leaders of their organisation and thinking, note to self, like it is for the leader of the organisation to make that more junior person feel very comfortable about any aspect of their role, or that they will be supportive if there's an aspect of their personal life that has sort of fallen apart or by the wayside given the lockdown. I do notice that one of my team is flatting, and there's 6 people in the flat. 2 of them got COVID, excuse me, and therefore they went into lockdown. And then somebody else got COVID, so they went into lockdown, and suddenly her mojo was really limited. And so we had to think about ways that we could really raise her up and make sure that she wasn't feeling under any pressure whatsoever to deliver more than she's capable of doing. And sometimes that's only 50%. And I think Dellwyn referred to that earlier. I think I have to say, International Women's Day, I'm just watching the questions come in, but International Women's Day does constantly remind me of how far we've got to go and how we're moving at such a glacial pace. And I just said earlier, I need to stop coming to these things because it ends up making my blood boil, thinking about if we had a pay gap 20 years ago, which was 12%. We've now got one at 9%, and that 3% was mostly due to the State Services Commission implementing measurements across the state sector. Yeah. I can tell you right now, that 9% isn't budging any which way in a hurry. So we really do all have a responsibility to step up and support the leaders like Dellwyn of the YWCA. Join the YWCA, become a member, join the National Council of Women, strengthen and support these organisations. And if you ever see any lobbying for a doubling of the Ministry for Women's budget, then absolutely support that. At the moment, it's pretty much a box-ticking exercise, making sure all the organisations across the state services sector have actually been doing a good job in terms of monitoring gender equality and pay gaps and things, but they need a lot more teeth.
Yeah. I think this is also like one of the most pressing issues at the moment, this like gender pay gap. And I know that the EMA is involved in quite a lot of conversations here as well. And probably it would be worthwhile to run another session like separately on that. And not only gender pay gap, it's like for anything else, may it be like Pacific pay gap or so definitely. So Dellwyn, maybe you wanted to chip in at that point, like, I don't know.
Yeah, so our overall pay gap is, as Sarah said, around 19% and has been for 10 years. But it's the points of intersection. So for Pacific women, it's 27%. And for Māori women, it's about 22%. And that's just shocking, really shocking. Our Equal Pay Act is 50 years old this year, and it's sort of taken us this long to say, actually, it's not delivering. We should have legislative reviews much more regularly than that. Part of what we're doing with Mind the Gap is to encourage people to talk about salaries and to encourage men and women to just ask, is there a pay gap in this organisation? What is it, and what are we doing about it? We're not very good at talking about money and salaries in New Zealand, so that's one thing that we're really trying to do.
How do we access the Mind the Gap, Dellwyn? How do we access that?
It's mindthegap.nz. There's a bunch of resources and contacts on there.
Mind the Gap, one word?
Mindthegap, one word, .nz.
NZ.
And there's that problem, isn't there, of the unconscious bias. Is that we don't even know that we are, that we've got a bias one way or the other. Because some of the behavior that we have is just so ingrained. We don't even think of it because it's just automatic. That's the sad thing.
Systematic,
I'm very pleased that these conversations around intersectionality are taking place, and Dellwyn, your organisation may well be doing some work there. So I mean, it's all very well for us to say, oh, look, the pay gap's been reduced, theoretically, let's say it has been, but actually who has benefited from those pay increases? It's generally white women like me that sit in leadership positions. It's not generally, you know, able-bodied white women, you know, and we all pat ourselves on the back, but what about women of colour? What about women in poverty? What about women with disabilities? What about women that are not hooked up with a partner and they're a solo mum? So that intersectionality, the woman plus another thing that often holds them back in life. So we need to start, you know, when we cannot take our foot off the pedal of this until all women are raised up.
Absolutely, yeah.
And just like continuing the conversation around tips for young women, maybe also Dellwyn, you want to share some tips that you would have for them?
Yeah, a couple of things I regularly say to young women is you're curious, you're not happy with something, you want to understand something better, start a conversation. So much comes from just having a chat with a manager, with a colleague, with somebody in your organisation, a customer. Just start having a conversation. And the other thing I encourage them is to practice saying no. It's okay to say no. It's really a positive thing to say no to something, because it reaffirms your commitment to something else that you really want to do, and not to be afraid just because you might be the youngest person in the organisation. You're entitled to say no. Say no because I'm going to do X, Y, Z. So those are the kind of, I have a lot of conversations in those two spaces.
Yeah, and I agree that is really hard to do, because the workload is increased, resources are not there. So of course you want to do your very best and help your clients, help your company do the best that they can. And there's a lot of commitments, and people have a lot of ideas of what we could do, but yeah, the time is only so limited, and we also have to look after yourself. So yeah, definitely saying no is important. It's just a challenge to say, like, when do I also say no? I guess, like, I can see that some women might have problems in saying no at all, but I'm at that point in my career where I'm like really like trying to figure out like what is really the things that I wanna commit my time to. So that is another challenge.
Part of it can be just getting people to notice what, when they're asked to do something, what's urgent versus what's important. Just being conscious of the difference between those things and how they're responding.
My mother gave me a very good piece of advice when I got married, because I was only 22 when I got married, which was, you know, quite young back in the day, and her advice was to be lazy. So
can you explain that a bit more?
Yep. She said, you know, when you're newly married, you know, she said, you want to run around, you want to do everything for your husband. And she said, but that is totally the wrong thing. She said, you need to be a bit lazy so that he has to learn that he needs to do some stuff around the house as well. And it's actually one of the best pieces of advice that she ever gave me. So because there is a very, my husband would probably say, unequal sharing of the duties now, because he does more around the house than I do. But I couldn't do what I do if he wasn't doing what he was doing. So, but it was just such a good piece of advice, and I think even in these you know, liberal days today, I think women still feel this enormous pressure on themselves to be a great cook, to be the one that has to manage the house, to be the one that's got to, you know, make sure that the kids are being looked after, you know, that when the kids are sick, that they are the ones that need to be the first ones to be taking the time off work. And men will say that that they share in that, but you know, it doesn't look like it is a that the dial has moved entirely into a all the way, right?
Yeah.
There are still
women need to take responsibility
yes
for, you said earlier, Susan,
Yeah.
what do I want? Like I read on my Facebook page from a woman that I really admire. I could not believe that she said this. She'd been off to a coaching course or something, and she said, and I've written it down, I can now ask my hubby for help instead of feeling ashamed that I can't do it all. And I was like, what?
Wow.
We are in 2022.
Yeah. Yes.
I was so shocked and disappointed that this highly intelligent woman had written, well, frankly, such a stupid thing. It was just incredible. So I mentor a lot of women, and I just say to them, I've always had the attitude of, I'm going to be a good enough mother. And good enough is good enough. You know, my kids love me. I'd do anything for them. You know, I probably didn't go to every single one of their soccer games, and I didn't see Matilda's first steps, but I saw her fifth step. You know, like it's neither here nor there, a lot of this stuff. Just be a good enough mother. Yeah.
You don't have to be perfect, because perfect is overrated. Perfect is heart attack material.
Also remember that if you're not in good shape, if you're not taking care of you, then you can't be a good anything.
Yes.
So yeah, that's that thing about saying no, that you're saying yes to yourself often when you're saying no to something else. So vital.
And that can be anything, right? That can be like anything you love doing and you're passionate about. It could be sport, it could be like maybe reading a book, maybe having a glass of wine by yourself, maybe go to the cinema by yourself, or something that is really just yours, your time, and where you maybe even learn something new and something that fulfills you and that brings you back to your normal self. Great. Just like looking at the questions, if we have any more questions, please submit them here in the Zoom chat, Q&A chat. But I think, Sarah?
Yeah, just while people are submitting, I just had one other point, and I think I touched on it earlier, but once a year I allocate, hundreds of hours of my time and tens of thousands of dollars to take on one issue. So last year, as many people know, it was the shambles of the leadership team at AUT. And I won't go into the detail, but suffice to say that 4 white guys on the senior leadership team have now retired. Sadly, they weren't fired, but at least they're not there. And it was a huge amount of effort to champion the need for a QC to be independently instructed by the Council of AUT, rather than the Vice-Chancellor, who of course led the senior executive team, commissioning his own inquiry and not being done by a QC. So between me, Marissa Patterson, and Ali Mal, the journalist, the 3 of us really advocated hard. And of course, on top of dealing with all of that, we had about 60 women at AUT that really wanted a shoulder to lean on. And that ended up being me at my place every Sunday morning for about 4 months. Now, the challenges of dealing with these issues cannot, as I said earlier, rest on the shoulders of a few. We all need to be stepping up. Now, it might be that you see something in the Herald and you write a letter to the editor in support. It might be that you reach out to someone and say, look, I noticed you're battling this issue. How can I help you? Because they are courageous people that take on these issues.
Wonderful. Yeah. Great. I was only also because I have you here right now, and I wanted to actually know what you guys, as the experts, think would be like interesting topics to cover in like any ongoing discussion in the same format, because I think it is very valuable for the women in business out there, like to have like regular conversations about these topics. I mean, we won't have the International Women's Day obviously every month, but there's probably some issues that we could talk about in like an event and invite like various experts to, maybe I can ask like every one of you guys, like, what do you think, what is like that issue that needs to be covered and need to be talked about? Maybe starting with Kenina.
I think there's, well,
sorry for putting you on the spot
no,
there.
That's right. No, that's right. I was going to say, I think Dellwyn talked a little bit about it, and I don't actually know how we even open up the conversation about it. Dellwyn said, and I completely agree, is that we're not very good about talking about money.
Yeah.
Right. When we want to, you know, like I'm trying to price a general manager's role at the moment. Right. It's for a woman. And I've gone out into the market because I really want to make sure that I am pricing the role appropriately. And because it's a woman, I want to make sure that I'm doing a really good job of making sure that I don't take certain things for granted, and that I don't sell her short, because I think she's doing a fabulous job, and I just want to make sure that I get it right. But trying to find people to talk about, you know, what they're actually pay. I mean, I don't want to go to strategic and pay $5,000 to get them to price a job for me. What I want to do is I want to go and just literally, I want to talk to some real people and find out what they're paying for similar types of roles. But that's a really hard conversation to have. And but I want to know what's really going on in the market, because even if I look at a remuneration survey, that data is out of date.
Yeah.
Right. One place you could go for that is a company of women who support women entrepreneurs, or some of the other women's networks, because they'll be grappling with the same sorts of things. They don't want to go and pay $5,000 to strategic pay. How do they, you know, or look at an organisation of similar size to yours and see what they're paying people? Yeah, that thing about we often shy away from asking. We need to ask. Yeah. You said women and money, because that actually is the same thing I would say is women and money is there's such a lot in that.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
definitely.
Kenina's comment segues quite nicely into my one. I had two spring to mind, but the one that segues nicely is networking, the power of networking, building relationships that you trust. Like I look at Kenina, I look at Dellwyn, I would go to both those women and you know, put my cards on the table and say, gosh, how am I going to deal with this? Yeah. So building a relationship with, you know, less than 20 people, but a depth in that relationship that means you trust them, you know how they think, you know that they'll be there to support you. And then my second one is sort of leadership 101, the importance of having a courageous vision for your organisation, a real impatience around getting that vision implemented, and having a great team around you to help you implement it.
Great, thank you. And Dellwyn, anything else you want to add? Like, what do you think would be a great topic to cover in the future?
Yeah, I think there's also some interesting things for older people to understand about the young ones coming into the workplace. They've got a really different life experience to us, and a different view of work. And of what's important. So I think that's an interesting space to learn as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Sorry, I would just like to add into Sarah's suggestion about the networking. Yeah. That I really like Sarah's suggestion. What most people think of networking is I go to a social event and I run around, I get as many business cards as I can, and then I stick those into my marketing, my CRM system, and then I just shoot stuff out to them. No, but that's what people think of as networking. Yeah. Right. And
what is networking?
That's right. And it's to understand that there is fishing And then there is relationship building.
Yes.
And they are two very different things.
Yeah, great. Well, we are running out of time. So on that note, I think this was a really, really interesting conversation, and I'm so thankful I could connect to you today. And you're doing so much for the community and for women out there. And thank you so much for joining us. I would like to not only thank you, I would also like to thank the people behind the set, like Jason from the studio, Deborah as the producer, and Aria also as the assistant for us today. And I would say to everyone, let's keep talking, let's stay in touch, let's keep you guys like in our network. And I would like to just end with a quote from one of my favorite authors from Nicaragua, Chaconda Belli, who said, "The world has gone forward when people have dared to have crazy ideas." So on that note, have a good rest of your day and happy International Women's Day. Chat soon.
Thank you,
Bye.
Mary.
International Women's Day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Bye.
Ciao.